Hi everyone, so my name is Erin Sawyer, and I'm going to be explaining what we learned in Chapter 9. So this goes into correlation research. So, correlation research is a quantitative method which is commonly used in education. Correlation research helps us explore relationships between different factors, such as student behaviors or attitudes, without changing anything in the environment. So, understanding these relationships is useful for educators because it helps us identify patterns that can inform teaching and learning decisions. So, throughout the presentation, we're going to explore what correlation research is, its strengths and its limitations, and why it matters in an educational setting. So, what is correlation research? Correlation research looks at the research between two or more variables as they naturally occur. So, unlike experimental research, it does not involve manipulating variables or assigning treatments. Instead, researchers observe and measure variables to see if they move together. So, to do this, they use something that is called a correlation coefficient. This means variables increase or decrease together. So a negative correlation would have a decreasing slope, a positive correlation would have an increasing slope on a graph, and no relationship would kind of just be a flat line. Or on a scatter plot, the points would just be all over the place and there would be no steady direction of the dots on the scatter plot. So, for an example, if we find a positive correlation between student attendance and the test scores, it means that students who attend more classes generally score lower. And I just want to highlight that bolded bullet point on the bottom, which says caution. Correlation does not equal causation. So if you've taken a undergrad course for education and now for grad school, you have probably heard this phrase. So we will go more into that in the next slide. So here I have a scatter plot of exam scores versus hours of study. So in this graph, like I said in the last slide, we talked about the relationships. So this has a positive slope. So this would mean a positive correlation. So we can see that more students study, the higher their scores tend to be. However, going back to causation does not equal correlation, this relationship does not mean that studying caused these higher test scores. There are other factors like motivation or prior knowledge, which could also explain the pattern that's seen in this graph. This is why researchers always remind us correlation does not always equal causation. So, another example of this could be higher parental involvement might be linked to better student reading scores, but this does not always prove that parental involvement causes these higher scores. Factors like motivation or prior knowledge or school resources could also be influences of this. So, this caution helps us avoid jumping to conclusions that aren't supported by data. So, some of the strengths of correlation research. So, one of the biggest strengths of correlation research is that it allows us to study large groups of people quickly and at a relatively low cost. It is also easy to repeat, which helps verify results. So, if you do your experiment multiple times and you get similar or the same results, your research study is going to be a lot more reliable than a research study that only conducted one repeat of the research study. So, correlation research studies are also great for identifying which variables are connected and worth exploring more deeply with other research methods like experiments. So, for example, if we find a link between homework completion and the test scores, then we might design an experiment to test if increasing homework could also cause better performance. Some of the limitations of correlation research. So, despite its usefulness, there are limitations to correlation research. It cannot prove cause and effect, it only shows that variables are related. Additionally, the quality of the data depends on honest and clear responses from the participants in the study. There can also be poorly written questions or survey fatigue that can cause biased results. Researchers must be careful when interpreting these findings and avoid making claims beyond what the data actually supports. So, understanding these limits helps educators use correlation research more wisely. At the end of chapter 9, they give us a real world example of what does a correlation study look like. So our real world example is from Carmen and Hawes. So they studied how parental involvement relates to sixth graders' reading achievements. So they surveyed parents about how often they help their homework or attend school events, and they collected students' reading scores. They did find a positive correlation. So back to what I said in the previous slide, the graphs would typically show a positive slope for this positive correlation, and students whose parents were more involved tended to have higher reading scores. However, the researchers did remind the readers that this does not always prove that parental involvement causes better reading. It's just that there is a link to this. This finding helps educators consider ways to encourage parental involvement as a part of student supporting student success, So why does this matter for teachers and researchers? So correlation research is valuable for teachers and for schools because it helps identify important patterns in student behavior and in their learning. So for example, understanding the relationship between attendance and achievement can guide efforts to improve attendance. Similarly, seeing how a homework completion relates to test scores can also inform homework policies in the classrooms. These insights help educators make data driven decisions and focus resources where they can have the most impact. While it doesn't answer every single question, correlation research points us toward areas worth further study or intervention. So, some of the key takeaways is that it is a powerful tool for finding relationships between variables in education. It helps us understand how different factors are connected, but it does not tell us about cause and effect. We need to use it carefully, recognizing both its strengths and its limitations. When we use it poorly, correlation research can guide effective teaching and strategies and inform research as well. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this overview of correlation research. I hope it helped you see how this method fits into educational research and why it's important for making informed decisions. And on this slide, you will see my references that I used to make this presentation.